We can discuss the story now with Alex Main in the U.S. Capitol. He's the Director of International Policy at the Center for Economic and Policy Research. He specializes in U.S. policy in the Western Hemisphere, international human rights, and the impact of sanctions across Latin America. Alex, really good to have you with us. First off, what's your reaction to the U.S.'s seizure of this oil vessel off Venezuela's coast?
Well, there's no doubt that it's illegal under international maritime law. One country can't simply seize the boats of that fly under the flags of other countries. That there's a clear violation of international law there, and then it appears that the U.S. now wants to hold on to the hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil that are on the tanker. That appears to sort of confirm what President Maduro was saying, that this looks awfully like an act of piracy. But I think what's a little unsettling here in Washington is just hearing the reactions of many politicians in Washington, those that have been opposed to potential armed intervention against Venezuela, who think that this is, in fact, a better alternative to seize these boats and to, as opposition leader Maria Corina Machado is suggesting, really try to cut off the economic lifelines to the Maduro government. The problem is that they're the economic lifelines not to the government, or not solely to the government, but to the Venezuelan people. They are what helps sustain the Venezuelan economy. And the sanctions that have been in place since 2017, that were put into place under Trump during his first administration, have done an enormous amount of economic harm to the country, equivalent to something like three Great Depressions in the U.S. And of course, that's led to human misery and the flight of millions of Venezuelans. Not all of the Venezuelans that have left Venezuela, left because of the sanctions, but Francisco Rodriguez, an economist who works closely with my think tank, has calculated that something like 4 million Venezuelans have fled the country because of these sanctions. So they've caused an enormous amount of harm, and it looks like the Trump administration, on top of these threats of military attack, are now doubling down on the sanctions regime and contributing to the further economic collapse of the country.
So, Alex, as you say, this is going to have a devastating effect on Venezuelans and so many others in the region, because the Trump administration says it will continue to seize such vessels. But what does that also mean for countries like Venezuela as well as Iran, who are so heavily sanctioned? Because a lot of this, some of the reports that we're hearing are that this is all part of a shadow fleet, which has for a long time transported oil from these countries despite them being under sanctions.
Well, yes, the shadow fleet, it's become quite enormous now. I think, some calculate it being, close to 1,500 vessels now around the world. It exists because of U.S. sanctions, and particularly, recent U.S. sanctions against Iran, against Russia, and of course, against Venezuela. And it's because these countries continue to produce oil. They need to find outlets, and they need to be able to bypass the sanctions in order to find market outlets. And so they're forced to resort to this shadow fleet, which is a very dangerous thing indeed, because this is a fleet of boats that's really unregulated, that doesn't identify itself properly, and so on. It's, all sort of in the black market. It's really something of a nightmare, from the perspective of, commercial,
Alex,
maritime.
Sorry to have to butt in there, but Alex, are the shadow fleet, as it's called, is that all legal in the first place?
Well, no. I mean, this is the thing. Not legal from the vantage point of, commercial agreements. They don't respect, some of the basic regulations. that regulate shipping throughout the world, because they need to sort of fly under the radar, right? Because otherwise they could be impacted by secondary sanctions because of these U.S. sanctions regimes against the countries that we've mentioned. So the shadow fleet is enormous, and I think the U.S. would have a very hard time seizing all the boats that are involved. But the root of the problem really, are these sanctions that not only create all of these complications in terms of maritime commerce, but also really contribute to an enormous amount of human suffering in these countries.
And they,
Venezuela and Iran in particular.
and they really don't seem to be going away anytime soon, those sanctions, but the US now actually imposing even more on that. I'm afraid we've run out of time, but Alex Main, really good to get your analysis. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Good to be with you.